2006 Jeep Trail Rated Liberty 4x4 3.7L. Need some front brakes. All right, so the very first thing you want to do before starting any brake job, take the master cylinder cap off. The other thing we want to do is set our brake fluid level. Right now it's basically right on the max line. We want it, if we're doing just front brakes, halfway down the reservoir. As we compress those front calipers back in, the fluid level should rise right back up to the master, or right back up to the max line. So let's suck that down. And I'm just using a Mighty Vac fluid evacuator. And the main reason I'm doing this is to make sure we don't overflow the master cylinder, get brake fluid all over the place. Okay, that's about halfway down, a little less than halfway, just to make sure. But that'll give us enough room to compress those calipers in. Other thing I like to do is just set a rag over the top. That way nothing falls in there, and if it does overflow a little bit, the rag will soak it up. Damn.
Just called asking for a quote. Gosh.
That's a lot. All right, and what we're doing right now is we're cleaning up any surface rust off of this hub. That way when we get our new rotor on there, it sits nice and flat and we don't have any built-in run out in that rotor. Because a lot of times what'll happen is if you don't clean up this hub face, and this one's actually probably fine, but if you were to leave rust chunks on here, you would end up most likely with a wobble built into the brake rotor after like 10,000 miles. So I just use these silicon carbide discs. I've got one that's made by a company called Kaifnt, K-A-I-F-N-T, hub cleaning tool that goes over the studs. Then I use this in between, and I use a wire wheel to clean up the hub area. I also like to hit the piston face and the spot where it contacts the outside pad on this caliper. These are fine. I'd be totally fine with them. If there was any rust buildup beneath the hardware on the bracket, then I'd hit these with a flat file. In fact, I'll just show you real quick. I'll just go over them real quick like this. Make sure and knock down any lifted up rust chunks before I wire wheel it. These ones are totally clean, so not even needed. But then I'd clean them up with a wire wheel. And basically what we're doing is we're cleaning up anywhere where metal's gonna touch metal. There's a rubber boot on this slide pin. You don't want to clean that with brake cleaner, because what'll happen is that brake cleaner will soak into this rubber boot. It'll end up causing it to swell up. It'll get stuck down inside that bore. So on the rubber boots, just wipe them off with a rag. If it's so gummed up that you need brake cleaner on there, then either take the rubber boot off or just get a new slide pin kit. But these take some new grease. I'm just using Sil Glide on everything. I only use Sil Glide on my brake jobs for all lubrication. And we're just lubricating. Jesus, dude. We're just cleaning up anywhere where metal's touching metal, including the slides. And then we just need a thin skim coat of Sil Glide on these pins. If you put too much in there and it gets stuck between the end of the pin and the bore, then it'll bottom out and hydrolock inside there. So you want to make sure it's just a skim coat. You also want to make sure you put them back in the same spot. So anytime I set a caliper bracket down on my bench, I always set it down with the pins facing this way. That way I know the top and the bottom where they came out from. And I like to clean these bores out with some brake cleaner. Just fill them all the way up. Then I'll use a little pipe cleaner brush. I get these off Amazon, just in packs on there. You can find them. Just look up pipe cleaner, drill fitting. That'll get them nice and clean. Blow them out with some air. Pins can go back in. I usually work them in and out to get it nice and lubed up. Twist them, turn them. Anything that does not call for red thread locker, I'll put blue thread locker on the caliper bolts. Dude, if you can't get the blue thread locker off, or even the red for that matter, then take your car to someone else to work on. And then I got a bunch of these arts and crafts brushes just off Amazon. I use these to paint on Sil Glide. Like I said before, anywhere metal's touching metal, and this just needs to be a very light skim coat. You don't want any excess grease on there. What this is doing is creating a barrier on the metal so it doesn't rust and lift under the hardware and get the pads jammed in the brackets. This is also helping protect against any sort of vibration and noises, because most noises from brakes comes from metal vibrating together from having no lubrication on anything. As soon as the parts get here, they're not here quite yet, we'll throw on the hardware, get that side ready to go. But we can go ahead and compress this caliper in. You can throw one of your old pads in there for a backing plate to push on, just so you're pushing nice and flat. And then you don't want to jam these pistons in there super fast and hard. Just squeeze them slowly, let them retract. If it feels like the caliper is not compressing and not going back in, and then you crack the bleeder and it does go back in, that means you have a restriction in the hose. So if you have to open the bleeder to get it to go back in, then there's something else going on that you need to fix. This one feels good. It's going in no problem. There we go. All right, and same thing here. If you love it, lube it. Anywhere metal's touching metal, including these piston faces, I'm just gonna paint on just a light skim coat. We'll wipe off any excess before we're done. And that's going to make sure we don't get any noise from our brakes on the backing plate. If you're following along on this Subaru compressor, we just finished up a vacuum sequence on it for 45 minutes. I'm gonna let it sit for 15 minutes before I charge it, just to make sure we don't lose any vacuum. Make sure our compressor seal's held up good. Waiting on parts for this thing, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the other side. Typically, I like to do one side start to finish before I move on, but if I'm waiting on parts, then I'll go ahead and move on when I need to. So, get this other side going. Same thing on this side. Same thing over here, just wipe off any excess, don't gob it on there. Just needs to be a skim coat. We're just trying to create a barrier between the hardware and the bracket so no rust gets down in between there and so it doesn't vibrate together. Okay, swap these around just to make sure they go back on the same side they came off of. And Now we don't need to like polish this, but do you see these little chunks right here? Watch when I go over it. See, I can still see little chunks in it. Just want all those high spots knocked down. Doesn't need to look like brand new. Just want it to be flat. Okay. Clean this caliper up. Beautiful. Push her back in. Not using like a pad on this side just because it sits on the inside of the piston to where it pushes on it nice and flat still, so it's fine if it's going in straight. Don't have to stress about it. Now one thing I'm going to point out, see how this boot is like pushing out right here? It's because there's a little bit of air trap behind there. So all we have to do for that is grab a little pick. It helps if it's kind of sharp, but you're just going to get down in between the piston and the seam of this boot and just lift up on the seam of the boot, and that will relax it and allow that air to escape out, and then you can kind of massage the boot back into place if you need to, as we don't want the boot getting stuck between the piston and the pad and then ripping the boot. So that's good. Now go ahead and do a light skim coat again, just where the pad's contacting the piston and the outside of the bracket there, or the outside of the caliper here. And then you don't want it gobbed on there. Just go ahead and wipe off all the excess. All right, and I'm just waiting on parts. So as soon as those show up, I'll go ahead and flip the camera back on and finish this up. All right, we got parts. Go ahead and get our rotors on to start out. So you got to make sure you're getting your hardware on the correct way. The flat side always sits on the inside, so it's not rubbing on the rotor. And then this little stepped edge, you can see if we put it on backwards it wouldn't fit right, but that stepped edge fits perfectly there. Make sure they're seated down in there nice and tight. Push down all the way. I typically like to get the flat side down first, kind of diagonal in there like that, and then push it over and down at the same time. And then same thing on top of this hardware, where our pads are going to ride on the ears. Skim coat. Don't need any excess in there. This is going to keep the pads from getting bound up inside the caliper brackets. Now I know some guys disagree with doing this. This is an argument that will never be settled in my opinion. But if I leave these with no lube on them, I've seen several times, maybe 20 or 30, I don't know, man. I've seen tons of times where pads get stuck in the brackets from no lube. But I not one time have ever seen pads get stuck in the brackets from lube and dirt getting stuck to the lube. And that's the argument, is that this lube collects dirt. But if you don't put it on there, dude, the pads are going to rust inside the brackets and get stuck in there for sure. So I lube them every time, never have comebacks. My brake jobs always last. These pads don't have wear indicators on them. And really they're the same inner and outer, but they do come marked inner and outer. But if these did have a wear indicator, then I would want our wear indicator to be on the leading edge of the rotor. And what I mean by that is, since the rotor turns this direction, I would want the wear indicator to be on the bottom of this inside pad. That way it was pushing the wear indicator up into the pad and not pulling it away from the pad and just breaking it off of there. Like I said, these don't have the wear indicators, so it doesn't really matter on this car. And then the way I like to get pads in, I didn't really show it very well on that one. I'll show it better on this one. Is I like to get this corner here diagonal down in place, and then put a little bit of pressure and roll it into the bracket. See, guys just fight with those all the time, especially when they're just starting out. And getting them in there diagonal and rolling them into place is the way to do it. Still got to get a little bit of Loctite on these threads on this driver's side. Haven't done that yet. And since I already have my tools over there, we'll start back on the driver's side, going back together with it. I like to load my pads up in the brackets on the bench. Just easier that way for me. Real quick, one thing I want to do, so whoever did the brakes on this last has a bunch of anti-seize on these bolts. I don't want that on there. I'm going to clean that off. I'm going to run these down and I'll torque all 4 of them at the same time once I look at the torque spec. When I'm running them down with my gun, I just hold the pad so they don't fly out of there. Yep. Dude, get back here, bro. Where are you going? Okay. Like I said, I'll go ahead and get this other side too so we can just torque them at the same time. Caliper adapter installation. 100 foot-pounds. Someone was really using this thing, dude. Set to 300. It's gonna take a while. Of course. It went from 120 to 15 real fast. Okay, there's 100. Nothing to it. Easy. Perfect. Love it. Anytime I grab a caliper off of wherever it's hanging from, I try to immediately hang my hook up so I don't forget them on there. Then on these pins, you got to make sure the flat side, see how it's rounded on one side and flat on the other side? You got to make sure the flat side is butted up in there. Same thing over here. Get rid of the hook. Sick. Everything's fine. Alright, and the caliper bolts just call for 11 foot-pounds. Not very tight. Seated plus 1/8 of a turn. Perfect. Little discount double check. Got it. Pads are in. Hardware's good. Let's put some wheels on, dude. There we go. Alright, then I like to just use my electric impact on low. It'll usually cinch them down to like 50 foot-pounds. Okay. And you just want to go in a star pattern and make sure you're getting the wheel bolted down evenly. As soon as I put wheels on, I like to set my torque wrench out on the bench while I'm cleaning up. All right, now I'm just gonna let the lift down until the tires are on the ground, but the lift is still supporting the vehicle. That way when I torque the wheels, it's not torquing up against the transmission. If you go to Common Specs and Procedure on Mitchell, scroll all the way down to the bottom, your wheel torque is always the last thing listed. This one's 85 to 115. I usually torque them to 100. Torque your wheels, fools. Pro. All right, and now that, and only now that the wheels have been torqued, I can go ahead and pull the lift arms out. I never unrack a car all the way until I personally check the wheel torque myself. And we're gonna wanna top off this master cylinder. As you can see, pushing those calipers back in, our fluid came up a little bit. Definitely not to where it's gonna overflow. But I wanna set that max fluid level with my calipers pushed back in. So I'm gonna go ahead and pump the brake pedal up. Now I'm not gonna push that brake pedal all the way down to the floor. I'm gonna do little halfway pumps. The reason why I'm doing it that way is usually when you're hitting your brakes, the master cylinder almost never travels the full pedal travel. There's just a slight possibility that if we were pumping that brake pedal all the way down, that we could nick the seal or something, or cause a master cylinder failure. Not very possible, or not super common, but it's possible. And our brake pedal is nice and stiff right at the top. So now I can go ahead and set the final level on it. I'm gonna set it right below the max. There we go, right below the max line. Now, in a perfect world, you would never have to adjust the brake fluid. If it was set to max with brand new brakes all the way around, by the time the brakes wore out all the way, you'd be down at your minimum line. And then when you push the calipers back in, front and rear, it'd bring it back up to the max line. If nobody ever touched this thing, then we could just leave it alone. But the reality is, the brake system gets topped off at oil changes, and so I always suck them down before I do a service. But that's all there is to it, dude. Front brakes on a Jeep. Now I'm gonna go drive this. My sequence for setting in new brake pads is 5 or 6 30 to 0 stops, and then I'll do 2 pretty hard stops from like 45, 50, and then drive it for about 5 minutes on a loop to cool the brakes back down. But easy, dude.